Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda?
Motion to approve the agenda?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
And a motion to approve the open session minutes from June 3rd, 2019.
Motion to approve the open session minutes from June 3rd, 2019.
Second?
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, so let's move to community comments. Do we have any comments from the community this evening? Hearing none, we'll move on to the superintendent's comments.
All right, well, good evening. I only have one thing in my report for this evening, and you should have in your packet some reports from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, because as a district we underwent a process known as tiered focus monitoring, and it's largely a compliance process to kind of look at, are we meeting specific regulations, standards, and benchmarks with regard to special education, civil rights, and English language learner education. So I've asked Dennis Todd, who's our Director of Special Services, to kind of speak to some of the highlights, and then we're also really fortunate to have our co-coordinators of our EL program, Deb Coyle and Kelly Radad, here to talk a little bit about kind of the background in it. And you know, hats off to everybody that was involved in this. To be real frank about this, this is a massive undertaking with regard to paperwork. It really is very much a paperwork and compliance mission, but still critically important. So maybe, Dennis, if you could first just touch upon the special ed piece.
Sure.
And then Kelly and Deb have put together just a few quick slides to kind of discuss their role with English language learners.
So in your background information, Joe put in the report, so any quick questions, if you guys have any questions about the report, I'm happy to answer those. As he said, it was very widely successful, in my opinion, and it was a very positive process. Of the 32 standards that the special education was focused on, we were compliant in 31 out of the 32. The one standard that we need a little more support in and we're working toward is transition planning for kids that are ages 14 to 22 and moving from graduation, and for students that are in our special education programs through their 21st birthday. So along with our IEP process, they have a transition planning form that we fill out with that. And that transition planning form starts to fuel the students' IEP as they move through the upper grades. And so after doing the record reviews through the DESE, they thought that we were in good shape with that, but they also thought that we had some room for improvement in that area. So that's something that we will be focusing on over the next 3 months. What the good news is, when I went back to look at some of our previous coordinated program reviews, in the school year 12-13, we had 17 areas that were found partially implemented. So, you know, in several few years here that we've been working on this, we've really made some nice systematic improvements, I think.
So that was in
12-13.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so that was mostly in terms of just coming up with a plan for post-secondary education?
No, that was, so in 12-13 we went through something called a coordinated program review, which now has been changed to tiered focus monitoring.
Okay.
And so when we did that in the school year 12-13, we had, like I said, 17 areas that were found not in compliant or partially implemented. So we're really proud with the work that we've done in correcting those areas over the past several years.
So what needs to be corrected in the current?
The current is just the transition planning.
Okay.
So so there's just one area that needs area of improvement, and it's mostly about quality because we're doing it. It just needs to be of higher quality.
Okay.
They really like to see student voice in the student's IEP, more student voice, so it really kind of ties in nicely with our portrait of a graduate information. So,
Good.
any questions on the reports? It's a pretty basic, simple report.
It's good to hear about the improvements since
Yeah.
the last plan.
I think so.
And maybe Kelly and Deb, just kind of touching upon the English language learner component.
You coming up there? Not seeing it yet.
I hope to be meeting these sometime real soon.
And the reason you have those would be.
I'm here in the seat, they're not mine.
Oh,
They
okay.
look really nice though.
Sorry.
I don't know why this is not playing.
We're just trying to get our slideshow presentation up on. Do we need to do anything in particular, Joe, with turning that on? Or should it automatically?
It should automatically pop up.
I put in what you told me. Can we try again? It shows.
Just so you can back up to that.
Did you have it up before?
I have it up there now.
There we go.
There you go.
Beautiful.
Although we are considered a low incidence district, we are still held to the same guidelines as all other districts. So we can have one student, or actually no students, is still held to the same guidelines. So we wanted to talk a little bit about what we went through with our program review, just as we weeks ago. So as you mentioned, it occurs every 6 years. Our evaluation year was 2018-2019. In February of the previous school year, we were notified of our self-assessment requirements. We were given 3 months to upload all required state data. And then in May 2018, after the upload, we were waiting for the state results. Possible outcomes were we were placed in one of four tiers. Tier 1 is the highest tier, which basically says that there's no risk that you are not following guidelines. Tier 4, you need corrective action. The state comes in and they really do a lot to fix the program problems. When we were placed in tier 2, which was a low risk tier, in January 2019, we received that information, and then the state asked us to upload additional 10 study factors to students that they picked from these different categories of L's, FELs, opt-out students, and elsewhere students. So, the opt-out students are students that are considered L's, but with the state, where they asked us hypothetical questions, what would you do if this happened or that happened? And then also asked us every aspect of the program, what do you do when this happens, and what paperwork is used here. So we did that. And then in May 2019, we received our draft CPR report with some findings. We then added additional data uploads, and a policy revision was uploaded as well. And then the June 4th, the final report was received. So all in all, this took about a year and a half to complete this process. Okay, so the important question is, how is our program evaluated? There's something called the Castañeda's three-pronged test. There is a lawsuit, Castañeda versus Picard, in which a Texas school district was found to be failing the needs of its ELs. Because of this, the federal government stepped in and decided to set up some guidelines for how programs should be evaluated. So it's a three-pronged evaluation process. So the first prong is whether or not your program that you use to teach these English learners is of sound theory. Is it research-based? Has it proven to be successful in other areas? In our case, we use sheltered English immersion. There are other choices that other districts use, such as two-way bilingual or bilingual education. Sheltered English immersion has two parts to it. It says that the students are being taught English using licensed ESL teachers, such as Mrs. Verdad and myself, as well as core academic teachers who have been trained and have been endorsed in sheltered English immersion. The second prong is effective implementation. Are there policies, procedures, and resources in place to implement the sound educational program? Do we have equal classrooms? Do we have licensed teachers? Do we have a curriculum that is current and as good as the other curriculum for the other students? And then finally, the third prong is student growth. Are students making progress? Our students are assessed typically with all the regular benchmarks from every school that they're in. In addition, they take a state test called Access, in which it's very similar to MCAS, but it's for language proficiency. So they are tested in reading, writing, speaking, and listening. This test is given once a year, and that data is uploaded to the state, and we are able to track the students' growth every year and get SGPs, the same as we would for MCAS, which really helps us to know, are we hitting the targets that we need to be hitting? The state would ideally like to see students exited from the program within 5 years. So that helps us to see what our targets are going to be. So Mrs. Verdad is now going to discuss the criteria that we were asked to address.
So I get the good hat before I get to tell you the good news in the end. So as you can see here, we had 13 individual criterion in which our program was evaluated on. And of all this criteria, it ranged from this access test that Debbie just mentioned, the program exit and readiness, which is us exiting our students, reclassifying them, the parental notification, the forms and the documents that we send home, down to our own professional development requirements and licensure requirements. This is a breakdown of just one of those criterion, ELE1, and this is how the standard is set, and it's based on the state and federal laws that govern what we have adopted in Massachusetts as well for our EL students. ELE5, we wanted to show you this briefly just to give you an idea of what we went through in the breakdown of each individual criterion. They asked us questions, we had to upload information, data, provide feedback, show student rosters, our curriculum development plan, what we have done in terms of meeting the expectations of Castañeda's three-pronged test, etc. So it was very comprehensive and thorough. And so after providing all that data, like Debbie mentioned in the timeline, we were contacted back with two findings. The first was for ELE7, which was parent involvement. And like she mentioned, we sent those surveys to those 10 families. And a review of those surveys indicated that not all the parents received a home language survey in their preferred language. So what we did is we updated our policies and procedures regarding this intake process, A home language survey is a document that every student in the district needs to fill, or every family in the district needs to fill out for each individual student. And so to rectify this and make sure that we were meeting compliance here, we downloaded all the translated home language surveys that the state has, provided that to each individual school in their front office or guidance office, and provided some training to the administrative assistants, and uploaded this evidence for the state. So they changed that. Their response was that we implemented that. So we corrected that. And the other finding had to do with licensure requirements. This was based on data that they pulled up from Edwin Analytics regarding the SEI endorsement of all core academic teachers in the district. And they found that most but not all held the SEI endorsement. So after reviewing this document, we followed up with a few teachers listed as non-endorsed on this list. And we found that of the 12 teachers listed, 3 were actually no longer in the district. 5 did hold the endorsement, but for whatever reason, a couple had to do with name change, and there was some confusion there. So 5 of them held the endorsement. 2 were actually not core academic teachers, so therefore were not required to have the endorsement. And the only 2 remaining were committing to taking the SEI MTEL or the course in fall of 2019. So we uploaded all this information and evidence to the state, and they came back with, again, just like the previous, that we had implemented that. So we were good to go there. As you probably saw in the document that Joe passed on to all of you, there were compliance ratings from commendable being the top rating where everything is met, and from the initial review of data down to not implemented where the requirement was totally or substantially not met. We, after uploading and correcting those 2 findings, were given the rating of implemented for all of our criteria, which is great. And we were found by the team to be in compliance with all the criteria reviewed. So we were really proud of that. As like Debbie said, it was a very lengthy, comprehensive, thorough process. And we are very proud and excited of our program and all the growth. And that the next monitoring period isn't until 24-25 school year. So, yes. And that's it. Thank you very much for your time. Are there any questions?
Just for perspective, I believe you remarked that there was a total of 41 students in the program.
Correct.
I always, to give perspective, and again, with 41 students, we're still very much considered to be a low incidence district. We're not framing it. But to put things in perspective, my very first year, 2011, 2012, we had 5 students. So it has been a rapid growth in a relatively short period of time. Again, I just for more perspective, how many different languages are we dealing with of those 41 students?
Of our L's, we have probably 10 languages spoken.
Okay.
15.
Yeah, we have, obviously, there are the majority of Portuguese speakers, Arabic, Spanish, but we have French, we have some
many
Indian dialects,
Mm-hmm.
we have Russian,
Ukrainian.
Okay. So again, outstanding job, the 2 of you as a department are incredible in your
our little wee
performance.
department.
Pretty
Up
much,
to.
but in
Yes,
your
thank you.
performance, in your commitment to your students, I can't thank you and commend your performance enough.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. All right. So the next thing on the agenda, subcommittee updates. Policy subcommittee comes first. We have the second reading and approval of revised policies that were introduced last meeting. We have the policy, well, who would like to go through the policy?
I can go through the policy.
Okay, good. Excellent.
Policy
That's the
subcommittee
policy
chair.
subcommittee chair, right?
Right. So first of all, you received some policies for first read, just for your review, and hopefully we'll approve those in August. And those have to do mainly with field trips, policies, procedures, and updating the field trip permission form. So those should be fairly, they're kind of no-brainer policies. They need to be brought up to speed and contain the information that the school nurses and the administration need. So those are just to review. The second reading are the policies that needed revision for a number of reasons, some to be in compliance with the health requirements of the state, others to sort of modernize and update language choices and things like that. So they dealt with student health services and requirements, screening and physical examination of students, and student immunizations, and the tobacco-free schools policy. So, since this is our second read, I'm going to make a motion that we approve, or we at least take a vote to approve policy, revised policy JLC, student health services and requirements, policy JLCA, screening and physical examination of students, policy JLCB, student immunizations, and policy ABC, tobacco-free schools this evening. Are there any questions about the policy?
I have one question.
Yep.
So on the student health services and requirements, it looks like the major edit was just the elimination of a few paragraphs underneath the emergency procedures handbook section.
Right, yeah.
That was just because they were,
And this up here.
okay, yeah.
Like
They were too specific, is that the idea? Or they didn't correspond with what
They
the
didn't
changes?
correspond with
Okay.
practices,
Okay, that makes
and
sense.
inserting the notation of the emergency procedures handbook is more appropriate. The policy is kind of an overarching, and the handbook itself is
Yep,
how
makes
the
sense.
procedure happens.
Yeah, understood.
Okay. Any other questions about those policies? All right. So I move that we approve the policies.
Seconded.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed?
Okay, and we'll talk to you
Passes.
again in August about the remainder of the policies that are listed for the first read tonight. Thank you.
All right, next is the budget subcommittee. We have a new chairman, Phil Zutter, in that subcommittee.
Okay. So we had a good meeting right before this meeting. We talked about how next year is going to be probably just as challenging as this year was. Our expectations from the state are not very high. So, we started that process of looking at that. So we also discussed about how we needed to re-engage with the multi-board meetings, and we'll start to look at putting those in place towards the end of the summer and for the fall, so we can make sure that both towns and the corresponding boards are aligned. And the other part too is that we'll be working on a proactive communication strategy, just to make sure that we're putting the information out there in an effective and consumable way so that people can have it. I mean, we clearly are very transparent right now, and people can get any information they want anyways because we publish it already, but I think putting it out there proactively so that the organizations or different people out there can get access to it if they have questions will be also helpful to making sure that people understand exactly how the money is spent, where the money is spent, and who's giving what and where it's coming from, which will be important as we go into next year's budgeting season. Questions? It will be a fun one.
I'm sure it will be.
Exactly. All right.
All right, and moving on to the Golden Apple Award Subcommittee. Carrie?
Okay. So we had our work cut out for us this time around. We had a total of 53 nominations, with 30 from Memorial, 9 from MISCO, 8 from Nipmuc, and 6 from Clough. And in this pool of nominees were people who had been nominated by several individuals, as well as people who had been nominated multiple times for this award. So it was a really tough choice for all of us. Words like supportive, passionate, dedicated were words that were used frequently and often. It's very apparent how highly our staff is regarded in the community. So it was a real honor for those of us on the committee to be able to read through these nomination forms, and a nice reminder of how lucky we are to live in this district. So our nominee, our choice at the end of this process, through their work in our community, has built a thriving and successful program. The groups that this person has worked with have brought home multiple awards, and what was really nice to read about was, on top of the success, This person has built an environment where their students feel safe and supported and get individual attention. And what was really meaningful to us on the committee was that this person not only received nominations from adults in the community, but also from their students. So this individual has connected with their students in a way that fosters 21st century skills that we value as part of our portrait of a graduate, including critical thinking skills, collaboration, creativity, and innovation. So at the end of our deliberation process, we were very honored to nominate Mr. Simon Harding for the 2019 Golden Apple Award. So congratulations.
Oh, we got some pictures.
Makes better photos. Next week I'll give you a buzz.
All right. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Congratulations, very much well deserved.
Okay, moving on. So we have, next is new business. Discussion of the Mercy school year calendar.
Okay, this technically probably should be old business, but then again, it's also new business. I believe at our solo meeting in May, on May 13th, at the end of the agenda correspondence, the email that you have in your packet from one of now our graduated 8th grade students just on Friday, a rising freshman by the name of Rebecca Tabakin, brought the concern to both myself and to the school committee chair with regard to the issue of religious holidays in the school calendar, and specifically the Jewish holidays in the fall, and in one specific case, how one of the evenings of the Misco Back to School night contradicted with Yom Kippur, but then also a larger issue around Good Friday. So I know over the past several years, when we've had the calendar approval discussion process in the month of February, that's come up as kind of a larger issue. So as you can see from the email from Rebecca, Rebecca has had the opportunity to discuss it with Mrs. Mannion, with Dr. Cohen, and I think this is a real important issue. It's a conversation to have. I'm delighted that Rebecca's here tonight, and she's here with her parents and also her rabbi. So I know you've got some thoughts to share, so please.
First, I'd like to thank you for giving me this opportunity. So this past year, I've been interested in social justice, so it led me to reaching out regarding the school calendar. And our district doesn't have Jewish holidays off from school. On our Jewish holidays, you're supposed to observe without studying or with the use of electronics. So although the day is excused, I still cannot really do my schoolwork, which causes me to fall behind. And I feel like that if we had the holidays off, then I wouldn't fall behind, or other students wouldn't fall behind.
Yep, so I grew up in a town in New Jersey that was not a very large Jewish population. And like the small population, the Jewish population in this town, my parents had to come before the school committee back in the early 80s, and my sister and I were missing school due to the Jewish holidays. And during the Jewish holidays, they were giving tests and they were progressing with the schoolwork. And it was very quickly in September, October, when you're really into upfront learning, you're falling behind quickly. And as a parent, moving to the town of Upton about 10 years ago, immediately tried to rectify within this town and say, well, how do we not have off for Jewish holidays? And I realized we're a very small minority in the town. My daughter, who has been more successful than I've been in trying to get in front of the school committee, really took a stand this year of recognizing in 8th grade that she was falling behind already. She missed school pictures because it happened to be on the Rosh Hashanah. On Yom Kippur, as the superintendent stated, my wife and I had to break our fast, which is when we fast for the Jewish holiday of Yom Kippur, to come to the back to school night because obviously we want to meet her teachers and find out how well she's doing in school. So because of that, it really just creates disruption for the community. I think from my perspective, when our rabbi's here as well, she'll probably agree with me, it's really a time that we want to be able to pray. It's a time when we don't want to have to focus on schoolwork or what we're missing. At the nighttime, it's tradition to spend time with your family and to be able to observe the holiday, similar to other beliefs as well. So what Rebecca's seeking for in her proposal to the school is that we do observe. So Rosh Hashanah is a 2-day holiday for conservative Jews and for Orthodox. The majority of the Jewish people in this town are Reformed, so most towns celebrate one day of Rosh Hashanah. And Yom Kippur, which is the high holiest of the day, that's also one day as well. They're 8 days apart. It's based on the Jewish calendar, so it does change. Sometimes it's on weekends, which stinks for Jewish people because we lose our weekends, but it's also good because they don't miss any schoolwork. So it is a sliding scale based on the Jewish calendar.
And the Jewish holidays, it's a different calendar than the U.S. calendar, so there are some years where it might fall on the weekend, so it's not asking for the days off every single year. And they're usually in the beginning of the year, which is like when the classes are moving quicker, and that's usually when I fall behind.
So I don't know, Rabbi, if you want to say a couple quick words. So this is Rabbi Garbage. She's our rabbi of Congregation B'nai Shalom in Westboro.
Thank you for having us and for the opportunity, and for Rebecca to present her case and describe her experience. I'm a rabbi of B'nai Shalom, which is in Westboro. We serve people from over 20 different towns. So this is probably about the 5th school committee that I've stood before. Every town works with this very differently, and I'm sure as superintendent, you're speaking to local superintendents, so you have some awareness of the different models that are out there. I think what I want to highlight, and then perhaps recontextualize a little bit, because it might help you address Rebecca's request, but also perhaps not tonight, but moving forward, have a broader conversation to put this in a different context, is that what you hear is a student who's finishing middle school is moving now into high school, where the pressure gets even more intense. That for any student who's looking at the homework they have to get done, the tests that have to be prepared for, they feel enormous anxiety and pressure. And taking a day off when everybody else is moving forward adds to that tension and to that pressure. And you're all acutely aware that kids these days are feeling a lot of pressure altogether. And the way in which our holy days are observed is, for the holiest of days, they are commanded to be days with no work. So it's not just about taking a day off, it's not having a family meal. There are other festivals that we do that way, and in fact there are other festivals on the Jewish calendar that are meant to be observed in this way. So she's not actually asking for all of the Jewish holidays to be observed, but the 2 holiest days of our calendar, the Jewish New Year and the Day of Atonement, are the 2 that almost universally people are trying to observe in a traditional way by spending the day in the synagogue in prayer with family and abstaining from work, which means it's not possible to get the homework done at the end of the day and be ready for school the next day. So that's the ask, and I think you put it really well. I don't need to add to your specific ask. So a little bit of context. Because I think that over the years when I've had this conversation, it's often one in which there's a struggle. We're trying to be respectful of separation of church and state, recognizing that there's many religions being observed in the town. I think it's important to acknowledge and label whatever choice you make that right now you do have the observance of one faith on your calendar, which is the Christian faith. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it's to say it's not a secular calendar. Even though some of those holidays are also federal holidays, there are also other times you're closed when it's not a federal holiday. So it is observing that. And I think that's been the makeup of this town, the majority for a long time. Just hearing about the report a little earlier, you have a town like the town of Westborough that is increasingly very diverse, a lot of different religions being practiced. And I think that the context piece that's important for me is to recognize that all of these different faith groups that are now living in areas like these are also all fully American. And so when we're talking about what are people doing in their lives, it's not some other group, it's not some immigrant group, it is part of the fabric of the town and the country in which we live in. So in Westborough, for example, I was on a subcommittee there that took a good 6 months or so to look into this in a very different way. And the school superintendent there wanted to look at how can we release some of the stress, anxiety, and pressure on the kids, and what are some of the factors that go into that. And so they looked at things like days off that would allow those who observe in a particular way to observe. We spent time learning about the different faith groups and how they observe their holiest days, because one of the things that it's important to understand is that not every religious group needs the same thing to make space for their observance. So how Muslims observe Ramadan, they have needs that they can express, but it's a little different. Most of my Protestant clergy friends in Westborough don't hold their Good Friday services until 4 o'clock or later. It's actually a fairly small minority of the community that has morning or lunchtime services. So even the needs for that day may be different than abstain from work. So what we were looking at was actually something more holistic and how to plug in a range of policies for the school calendar that teachers would have at the beginning of the year that would enable them to be more sensitized to those different cultures and observances. So it included days off, but it also included things like a no homework night or a no test day. Certainly not an open house for parents on the holiest day of the Jewish calendar. And so it raised awareness. And what I was telling Rebecca on our way in is that it's been really nice to hear parents tell me that their Jewish kid comes home, and when they say, "Did you have homework tonight?" and they say, "No, we don't have homework tonight because it's Eid." So it's being announced in the classroom, and there's a growing awareness of the kids as to who else is in that room and what they're observing and what's special for them. So it's more of a kind of a cultural recognition. So I just present that as there is a very specific ask on the table. It would be wonderful if this school district could recognize that and recognize the difference it would make to the Jewish students. But I hope that this might be an invitation also to a much broader conversation that you could contextualize in a way of thinking about the needs of all of your students. So thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any questions?
I just want to compliment you for bringing this forward. That was one of the reasons why we wanted to take a look at it, because a student actually mentioned it. So thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your time.
Something we have to consider.
I would be interested as superintendent, as the rabbi mentioned, in taking a look at what other districts have done, and particularly I like your mindset around that holistic approach, because I do think that this is a larger discussion than just Jewish holidays. I think it's a larger discussion around, yes, there is that component of separation of church and state, but it's also how do we honor all faiths in a holistic way in our school calendar. So maybe if we could touch base a little bit further, Rabbi, about some of the work that's been done in some of the districts that you've interacted with, that would be outstanding.
And just to add on to that, I think we've considered in the past having a purely secular calendar, but that doesn't address all of the things that you brought up. So thank you very much for that.
Just to add, I think we discussed at our previous meeting, just creating some awareness with the staff around like how this does impact students, like, you know, not just for the Jewish holidays, but for any faiths, like Muslim students and like when they're observing Ramadan and what their needs are around that.
Yeah.
I think it's really important.
I think we definitely need to do more work in that area.
Thank you again. All right, next topic. Any correspondence?
I think you're missing
Old business. Yeah, I skipped over one.
That would be a small one to get through.
Okay, old business. We have Nipmuc Misco athletic user fees.
Okay, you have in your background notes just the fact that this is a continuation of this discussion from the last school committee meeting where we talked about some of the issues with regard to shortfalls in our operational budget with regard to the last 2 years. Something in the ballpark of around $20,000. And the fact that with some of the constraints that we're facing financially as a district, we might want to take a long, hard look at raising the athletic user fees, which are currently at $195 per sport. So you have before you 3 different options that our athletic director, Chris Schmidt, has formulated. Chris, can you kind of speak to those 3 options and kind of the mindset behind them?
Sure. So what I did was kind of looking at what some other districts do, working with Jay, Bayer, and I guess there's 3 schools of thought. The first school of thought is a flat fee. So in other words, what we currently do, regardless of sport, we take a look at, what we think that we would need to bring in per athlete to be able to offset the operational shortfall in order to meet our expected needs. So in working with Jay, we came up with a number from a flat fee of $250 per athlete. Now, this doesn't take into consideration different sports have different needs, have different costs. So based on a brief discussion at our previous meeting, I looked at 2 other options. So option 1, which is a simple tiered structure, where just looking at simple cost, what does it cost to run each sport? For obvious reasons, football is our most expensive sport, whereas on the opposite side of that, golf and cheerleading are our 2 least expensive sports. And then everything else pretty much falls within line of one another, okay, within a few $1,000s here or there. So what I did was, okay, so logically we raise our football fee $25. The other 2 sports, golf and cheerleading, which are by far our least expensive sports to run, we reduce those $25 to $225 and essentially keep everyone else at $250. The third approach is also a tiered approach. Mr. Clemens and I were talking, and he said, well, what if you looked at it from a base 10 approach? In other words, what would it cost, do a cost analysis based on if each sport had 10 athletes in the cost from that perspective. So, and I believe you all have in your notes that chart there. So basically using the yellow, orange, and then red signatures, you can see basically what each sport costs. The far right column is the number of athletes projected in that sport. And then that number between the two is that base 10. So in other words, what it would cost if 10 athletes ran or participated in that sport. And based on that, I also used the 250 as that middle 275, 225. So your sports in yellow would be your 225, your sports in orange would be 250, your sports in red would be 275. And there are some things in this particular approach that you would want to consider is some of the sports that are quote unquote in the red, they are somewhat of our money generating sports. We do bring in gate receipts and things of that nature with those sports, which in the other sports we typically do not. So that's the three approaches that we felt best sort of represented what we do.
Are some of the NIMUC sports, not NIMUC, MISCO sports included in that? So like for, I think cross country is like a 6th grade sport, I believe?
I did not run the MISCO numbers.
Okay.
Typically, I do know cross country 5th through 8th grade typically participate in the running sports at MISCO. However, 7th and 8th also has the option to run at NIPMUC, just based on our numbers. We've afforded that.
Yeah, so the part that I kind of get a little concerned about is we lose, if we start losing athletes because it just isn't worth it to participate anymore, then your numbers are essentially going to change. Obviously.
Absolutely.
So, the keeping, cross country I think is more of a entry level sport. I'm mischaracterizing that at all, or?
Well, I think the best way, I think it's a sport that frankly doesn't have as much cost with it. A lot of times your non-cut sports are sports that athletes that may not be your traditional athlete or may want to try something without fear of being cut, they'll go and go through that sport. So I don't know if it's much entry is. It's a sport that sometimes it draws interest from what I would describe as non-traditional athletes.
Right. You're still faced with the transportation costs.
Yes.
So and those, I don't know how significant those are.
Very.
Yeah. So here we are with transportation again.
Yeah, the reality is this is a lot of, certainly Jay can attest to this, much of our costs are transportation, officials, and our salaries, which are fairly, they're items that we don't have a lot of control over, I guess. In other words, I can't not pay, it is what it is in that sense. So, with transportation, you can get creative. Like for instance, baseball, softball. Typically, I can schedule baseball, softball teams to travel on the same bus. So that offsets a little bit. That offsets the cost in a sense. It doesn't work perfectly, but it works more than it doesn't work. Not all the sports afford that opportunity. I can't do it in many of the fall sports because from a numbers standpoint. If I'm sending field hockey and volleyball, we don't have enough to throw them on the same bus. So when we can do it, we will. Like in the case of maybe I can put golf and volleyball on the same bus. And if they're traveling to the same area. So Mo Coburn at Telestone and I, we do get creative as much as we can to try to offset some of those costs. But it is difficult to do that.
So just to cap it off, so the cross country, to have a cross country kid at 5th grade, they're paying $225. Is that the idea?
I believe, and Jay, please correct because I know Scott's not here. I believe he was requesting $225, $250.
Yeah. So right now his fees are $175 still because they never raised them at the middle school. Where the high school is $195. I know that Scott would like them to go up because he spends a lot of time fundraising, and quite honestly, it's a pain. I don't think I would put Misco as high as Nipmuc, just because it's middle school.
Yeah.
You know, you're talking about a total budget at the middle school of about $68,000 as opposed to close to $400,000 at the high school. So maybe you go to 200 or 225 across the board, I mean, at the middle school, and then go to some kind of tier thing. I mean, the problem we're going to run into is that no matter what we do with the fees, unless we go above 300, it's going to take probably 2 to 3 years to offset the deficit that's building, because we're just not funding enough in athletics. The cost to run the programs we run costs more than we're providing through fees and operational budget. And you can only hit fees so much. So eventually we need to address this on the operational side as well, which we didn't do this year. We pretty much...
We level funded it for 3 years.
Yeah, I want to say the athletic budget has gone up. It might be up like 7,000 or 8,000 this year. That doesn't really do much in the big picture of things. So that's something that we need to think about for FY21. But yeah, you know, as far as the middle school, I mean, I think even if you went from 175 to 200 at the middle school, you probably wouldn't affect, you know, people participating, and it at least will provide some additional money at that level. There's not a shortfall in the middle school budget at all. I mean, he's staying within what he's got to do as best he can. But he's got a lot less things. He's got a lot less travel. I mean, you know, Chris is right. The big ticket things are coaches, buses, and officials. You know, the stuff like, you know, balls and you know, supplies are like 300, 200 as opposed to 4,000 and 5,000 for the big ticket things. So that's not going to, you know, that's not the big picture. And quite honestly, those coaches' stipends are going to go up again because you're going to be negotiating, and it's all tied to the contract. So long term, we need to look at it on the operational side. But short term, I think the fee structure, you know, anything that he's proposing, any one of them will help address it. I don't have a preference either way, to be honest with you. As
So
long as
I guess that's the only concern I would bring up, is that if we start jacking up the prices for the middle school students, you essentially change your whole budget structure. You make it more expensive for everyone.
Well, we had that issue. I don't know. I think Chris was here at the time when the fees were you here when the fees were like 600?
No, you did me that favor.
I mean, I think we actually had
It was
difficult time
pre-override.
fielding a girls basketball team because we couldn't get. I think the fees were like 650 or 700.
Wow.
We had trouble getting enough kids to actually play.
And it made it go up higher. The parent that paid it.
So thanks to Kelly, we still have girls basketball. But you know, I'm not sure that going like to 250, 275 in that range is going to impact it as much, because I think parents still want their kids to participate in the athletic programs. You know, what's the magic number by which you start to hurt yourself? That's really hard to say. Quite honestly, for me, on the budget side of it, if I'm only looking at the money, I would tell you to go to 300, but I know that that's a big jump from 195.
Yeah.
So.
So what are we trying to target from the standpoint of subsidization, I'll call it? Are we, you know, right now, I think if I look at last year's budget, I look at the pieces out there, we basically funded from fees 32% of the overall budget. Are we trying to maintain that? Are we trying to bring that up? You said that ran a deficit of what?
Well, we just got a bunch more bills in the last week that have increased that shortfall.
Okay.
You know, we raised the fees on average to 250, and I think what Chris has structured pretty much brings in the same money based on a tiered approach. You're talking about another $29,000, $30,000 a year coming in, which helps on the operational side, but doesn't help on the shortfall. I can't really give you an exact where that shortfall is going to be until I get all the bills in, and I'm still getting them. I got a couple tonight actually, but they're small ones. As far as a percentage though, let me, I can pull up a spreadsheet that tells you, well, if we're taking in the fees, if we, at 250, you're going to take in about 132,500 in fees, and you're funding about 235,000 in operational. So it's about a 30% 33, 66% split, 1/3 and 2/3. I mean, yeah, it's probably more like 30-70 right now. We need to get probably 35-65, 40-60. But like I said, I think long-term, hitting more and more fees isn't the answer. I think it's funding it on the operations side. You know, if we value the athletic program as one of the things we offer as an extracurricular activity, we need to fund it as well.
No, I agree.
You know, it is part of the culture of the building, you know.
What you said the last time we met, kind of a victim of our own success.
Yes, absolutely.
You know,
Some of
costs
these
are where they
escalating
are,
costs,
mainly,
yeah.
you know, because of.
I mean, the bills I'm getting now from, from Telsco for transportation aren't from, they're from games in late June, which means that there are games that are going on now. Are you done? Are you still
Yeah, have we talked about too, I guess I would also look at it, I'll go across the street, in BPT, part of what they manage in this is they have some of their own buses at a smaller level that help fund the smaller sports. So if I think about golf and I think about, it could be a combination of, look, you've got golf, you've got some level of basketball, you've got, cross country, you've got cheer. If you had the little bus or one or two of these things, all of a sudden our transportation costs, which are the major factors, would go away, or at least would be reduced significantly.
Yeah, quite honestly, I'm not convinced of that yet. I mean, I look at golf, you got 16 kids, the bus holds 15, so that means you still don't have enough, and you've got to get the coaches to drive, or you've got to hire a driver. The vehicles themselves run about $65,000 a piece.
The only thing is,
It would help.
you're right, but we only travel 8 in golf.
Yeah.
So the places that vans like that would help are, to your point, golf, especially later in the season of cross country, indoor track, outdoor track, where we have few athletes.
Right.
In some of those cases, we're asking parents, and I know Phil has graciously done this for me, we're asking them to transport basketball, certainly. So I do think that's a worthy conversation.
It's something to look into, is all I'm saying.
I mean, it would help, having a van would help on the sped side as well with the trips that they go out, the vocational trips during the day. But of course, if that bus is out for that, then it's not available for Chris after school because it may not have gotten back in time. I mean,
Right, I totally get that.
you'd probably need 2 to make it work.
Yeah.
So if you're talking 130,000 and you lease them, because you wouldn't come up with that cash up front. It is something that we probably need to look at.
At least to understand the savings that we would get
Yeah.
from it.
But it doesn't help with the sports that have, 25, 30 kids.
Yeah.
It's only the small time, the small sports, or like you said, the end of the year where you're sending 5 kids to a track meet.
Yep.
I'm glad you broke it down by cost per 10. That makes it much more clear where the expensive sports are.
Yeah, it's a little bit, obviously, if our cross-country numbers grow, that, it's all number driven, obviously. So, you look at that, well, cross-country seems to be the outlier right now. Well, it's a sport that's rebuilding and actually has grown quite a bit in the last year, and we expect it to grow this year. Same with girls basketball, which our numbers have been low lately, but our hope is in another year to 2 that will grow. So, those quote-unquote sports in the red, some of those will fluctuate over time. A lot of the others are pretty fixed in terms of our numbers, the exception of maybe lacrosse to some extent. Right now, we seem to be in a little bit of a valley with regards to our numbers, but hopefully as the youth regrows, those numbers increase, and then we're talking something different. But
Okay. All right, so what are our next steps for this discussion?
I think you need to think about which option makes the most sense and deliberate. And if you choose to increase then you would need a formal motion and a vote.
All right, so we have one more meeting coming up.
No,
This is it.
yeah, we take July off, and then our next meeting isn't until about like August 13th.
Hey, Chris, don't you have registration?
August
right now
12th.
for fall sports?
Registration is open. Typically, the majority, because we do not collect fees online, the overwhelming majority of our fees are collected in August. The challenge is August 13th is about 3 days before football starts. So, I just ask that you be aware of that. So.
Yep, I do.
Do you have a recommendation?
Um,
I mean, I know it's not easy in either way.
Yeah, I mean, as I look at the cost per 10, it's certainly by far the most interesting. How do you justify our soccer teams, which are some of our most successful and deepest traveling teams in tournament, are the ones that are paying the least, whereas our cross-country team, our small, one of our smallest, their fees are equivalent of that of football. I don't know. I get the numbers are the numbers. I guess from in what does it look like? Is that it, how much explaining is going to have to be done? Whereas the tiered above, it's a simple cost. It's a cost analysis. This is what it costs. Is that make more sense? Or are we just simply looking at a flat fee? The other option would be, and it's not there, but if it's something is $250 for all, and then with the exception of football is $275. I think it's undeniable football is an expensive sport. If you look at any school that has it, that has some kind of structure, it's going to be more. That and hockey typically. We don't have hockey, so we don't have to worry about it. So the optics thing concerns me with the third one. The other thing to take into consideration is a lot of schools that do tiered systems, their coaching salaries are tiered. Ours are flat. So it doesn't matter what sport, what season, it's the same for everything. And there's a lot of philosophy behind that as well. So to me, I look at that and that's a factor as well, as I think. So I guess of the two that are out there, I would say number one or number two to me makes them, either or makes the most sense.
Can I propose something? Can we get just a hand vote for who is looking at option number one versus option number two?
John, can I just add to what Chris said? If you look at, as opposed to the cost per 10 athletes, just look at the total cost it costs to run the sport, because as Chris said, the coaches are the same. Cheerleading and golf are both under 10,000, 8,000, 9,000. Everything else in here is in the 15 to 20 range, with the exception of football, which, to tier it like that, I mean, you look at indoor track costs 16,000, and boys volleyball costs 16,000, but you're going to do 275 for that and 225 for the other. To me, doesn't make a lot of sense.
I didn't need to eliminate option three, but it just, to me, it
Right.
seems automatically inequitable. So, I don't know, can I get a show of hands for option one? Which you prefer? Option two? Okay. All right, well.
That's it,
Now we got real different.
Then I'd like
making the
to
motion.
somebody make a motion then.
So I make a motion that we approve option 2 as the new 3-tier fee structure for Nipmuc Athletics.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Passes.
Can I ask, so what are we, is there a proposal for what we're going to do for MISCO as well?
If you want my recommendation, I would probably tell you to do either 200 or 2.25 for MISCO, just to provide a little bit more
And
funding.
what is it currently?
175. We did put in the budget 20,000 for transportation.
Yeah.
So we did increase that, which helps, but I think it should go up a little bit as well. I think, like I said, I know Scott wants to do like 1 or 2 fundraisers instead of 1 or 2 a season. Maybe 200 is a fair thing for next year, just because it's middle school as opposed to high school.
Yeah.
And I would tell you to
Makes
do
sense
that
to
as
me.
well.
Yeah.
Okay.
Makes sense to me. I mean, don't get me wrong, nobody loves to increase fees at all, but it makes
Okay.
sense with where we're going.
Entertain a motion for that.
I make a motion to increase the MISCO athletic fees to $200, from 175.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? All right. Ouch. So, all right, so now we're on to old business. No, I'm sorry, correspondence.
Just simple correspondence, note cards, thanks and gratitude from our 3 retirees.
Okay.
So,
It's great.
Cool, great. All right, other matters not anticipated by the committee within 48 hours of posted meeting. Anybody? No? Okay, future agenda items will be the MERSD fiscal year 2019 closeout on August 12th. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Adjourned at 8.